guest speakers from Childline. So Jennifer and Martin from Childline joined us today, and so they're going to talk about who Childline are and what they do and what kind of opportunities they have and what they look for in candidates. If you're thinking about volunteering, or if if it's related to your courses that you are working with children, or related to psychology, how people think and behave, etc. I think it would be a very, very interesting and insightful session. So welcome, Jennifer and Martin. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's great. So would you like to just start off, Jennifer?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Jennifer Burke. I am one of the supervisors in the Glasgow base, and I have worked with Childline. I've been with Childline now for about 6 years all in. I'll let Martin introduce himself and come back to me.
Okay, I'm Martin Whelan. I have been with Childline NSPCC now for about 18 years in various forms, and my current role is I'm a night service supervisor, which also gives me the privilege of talking directly to children and young people throughout the night.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, so I think I'm going to give just a bit of an insight into how I got into Childline, and then I'll talk a bit about what it's like to be a volunteer, and what training opportunities we will provide, but also what you would get out of it from a volunteering perspective, but also what kind of skills it'll help you with in terms of applying for jobs. And I think it's really helpful for anyone who is studying psychology, any sort of educational program, social sciences, social work, teaching. The skills that you will learn at Childline cover so many different career opportunities. It really does kind of set you apart from other people who are on your course. So I finished school, went and did a business degree at uni, so nothing to do with Childline, nothing to do with psychology, children or young people. And then I think probably about 8 or 10 years ago, I then went back to UWS and did my master's in psychology. So it was the conversion course over a year. And when I started that course, I then started looking at volunteering opportunities, because I'm sure as students you'll hear all the time, it's not just about what qualifications you've got, it's about your life experience, it's about those volunteering and work opportunities that can kind of make you a standout candidate when you're applying for jobs. So for me, working with children and young people I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So Childline seemed like the perfect fit, really, in terms of where I wanted to kind of align my career. So I started as a volunteer, and I started on the night service, actually working alongside Martin. And then very quickly, I think it was probably only about 8 months afterwards, I actually got a job as one of the staff counsellors. So we've got volunteer counsellors, but we've also got a small core number of paid staff counsellors, and they help support the service at times where we maybe just don't have enough volunteers to answer the calls that come through from the young people. And then again, probably within about a year and a half, I then got a job as a supervisor. And that's what I do now. I've also been on the training team in the organisation. So I'm very much involved in helping train new volunteers, helping train staff as well, just to make sure that we're kind of meeting the needs of all the young people that come through, and that our skills are up to date, and that we're making sure that we're providing the best service that we can. So I suppose in terms of being a volunteer, it's quite a unique volunteer opportunity, I would say. It's not like any other volunteering role where you maybe just turn up and you maybe get a day's training or half a day's training about what you might need to do, what's expected of you. We really do invest a lot in our trainees. So it costs £1,200 to train one volunteer. So you can imagine that, we are spending a lot of money to make sure that we give you the skills that you need to be able to then support the young people that come through and talk to us. And that really then does set you up in as best a way as possible to be able to answer those calls. I think on average, 2 young people a minute contact the service, which doesn't sound like a lot when you just hear 2 children, but when you think how many minutes are in a day and multiply that by 2, that's a lot of young people that are coming through, and that need somebody to be able to talk to. And that's all we're asking for you guys to do, is to provide a listening ear. I think I kind of looked up some figures before I came on, and I don't want to bombard you all with numbers and statistics, but I think some of them are quite striking. So across the year, we generally will give 200,000 counselling sessions to children and young people. And when you break that down, that's almost 16,500 over a month. So there's a lot of young people that need someone to listen. And over half of those contacts relate to mental health, suicide, and self-harm. So over the pandemic, I think we've certainly noticed as a service that the risk that young people are experiencing and those difficulties, those challenges, has got worse. And I think, you know, the guys that are here just now from psychology, you'll be aware of kind of some of the mental health challenges that young people are facing. And actually, I suppose anybody that's going to be watching this, I think we all recognise that there's a bit of a mental health crisis, and we're definitely feeling that at Childline. A lot of services are at breaking point, and as a result of that, the children that come through to talk to us don't have anywhere else to go. They don't have access to CAMs. They don't necessarily have access to teachers that they can talk to in school. Everyone's just so stretched. And we will hear often that our number is given by these professionals for young people to talk to. So, you know, it's really vital that we can provide that service. And I think, you know, we really value the volunteers that come through. And from being a volunteer myself, and even as a staff member, you know, it really is a privilege to be able to talk to these young people. You know, we're asking them to open up about what's happened in their lives, what's happened to lead them to feel the way that they feel. And that might be something that they've never done before. We might be the first person that they've told that they're feeling like they want to end their life. And that, for me, is a real privilege to be able to be that person that can offer support. We talk to children and young people up to the age of 19. So at their 19th birthday, we would then not be looking to work with them. And we will speak to young people on the phone. Also on an online chat, we've got an online chat service that we provide. And they can send in emails, and there's a dedicated team that will respond to those emails. So for us in Glasgow, and we're based down at Glasgow Green, it's mostly voice calls and chats that we would deal with. And there's never a minute really in that counselling room where it's quiet. It's a very busy service. And I suppose when you think in those numbers that I've just given you, you know, 16,500 counselling sessions in a month, in Glasgow on a shift, we might only have 2 volunteers. So we are really crying out for volunteers to help us, but obviously in return, you will get a lot from that as well. And I'll talk a wee bit about that. But I think it just really highlights, just hearing those stark figures from one extreme to the other, how important it is that we have people like yourselves who would be open to helping us as a service, but predominantly helping those children and young people that need a space to talk. I'm sure Martin will touch on the night service, but you know, another example is during the night, our base on a Sunday and a Monday is the only base that's open in the country, and that's across the whole of the UK, Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, Wales. And there are nights where there's maybe only 3 people in the base to answer the calls that are coming through. So that's 3 counsellors, potentially only 2 counsellors, because there'll be a supervisor there to offer support in the room. So say 2 counsellors that are there to answer the calls for the whole country. So it's really important that we continue to ask for volunteers, but also that we, like I was saying earlier, invest in you guys, because we appreciate the time that you're giving up, but we also recognise how needed and how valued it is as well. So yeah, I suppose in terms of the base in Glasgow, I would say, you know, being Glaswegian, we are very friendly, and it's actually a really nice environment. Every shift that you would come into, we would offer what we call a brief. So you'll come in and chat with the other people that are going to be on your shift. There's always 2 supervisors that are on, and we're there to support all the volunteers, all the staff counsellors. So we would facilitate that brief, and then we'll talk to you about maybe anything that's important that's happening that day. Then you would go in, and each shift is around about 3.5 hours. And that would be where you would take the contacts. And then at the end of each shift, we offer a debrief. And that debrief is really valuable for you, because it gives you the opportunity then to talk about how you felt, the impact of those contacts that you've maybe had during the day. It might be that nothing's impacted you, and that's fine. And we're not looking for you to come into the debrief and be upset or to be significantly impacted. But we recognise again that it's really important for you guys to have that space to be able to offload your feelings, because it can be difficult. And I think it would be unfair if we didn't highlight at the moment, you know, the level of risk that we are dealing with, the number of young people that are coming through that are saying that they want to end their life or that are significantly self-harming. So I suppose it's something to keep in mind yourselves, that if this is something that you want to do, whether it's for your job in the future or whether it's just something that you want to do at the moment, think about how you might cope with those situations. How might that touch you, and how might you build up some resilience around that? So yeah, it's not easy, but there's a really nice feel around each shift, and you get to meet people from all walks of life. Our volunteers are all ages, have come from all different backgrounds, but we're all there for the same thing. We're all there to offer support. So everyone's got that kind of empathic nature about them, and that kind of builds a bit of a bond on shift, which is really nice. And then from that, people build friendships and start socializing and networking and all the things that, you know, you would want to do. So yeah, I think in terms of training, like I was saying earlier, our training is really comprehensive. Actually, it's a really robust training system that we've got. It is done nationally. So it would be a bit like this. You would log on to the system once a week, and how they work the training, they call it a flipped learning approach. It's probably quite similar to some of the things that you maybe do at uni. So there'll be some coursework that you would have to do before your session. And then there's a 3.5 hour weekly session that runs for 11 weeks. And in those sessions, we teach you about our Childline counselling model that we use. And that's quite specific to Childline. So, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The main reason is that obviously everybody is then trained the same, and they've taken aspects from different counselling models, from different psychological theories, and put it into a model that works specifically for Childline. It then means that regardless of your background, if you've come from social work, psychology, education, you know, retail, it doesn't matter where you've come from, everyone's starting at the same level. So nobody has everyone has different knowledge, but in terms of the Childline model, everyone's starting from scratch, and it just puts everyone on a level playing field, which we find is much better. So you would be with the same group every week. And again, although it's done online, you do form relationships because you're spending 3.5 hours with fellow trainees each week. And you're talking about emotive subjects. So you naturally build up a bit of a bond and a bit of a connection with each other. And we really do try and prepare you for what you might experience in the counselling room. So we spend a good amount of time talking about the model and working with empathy and how you will interact with the young people. So, you know, the skills that you'll use, maybe reflection, open questions, just active listening skills, engaging with those young people to help them feel that they have a safe space to talk. And then we also give you some good knowledge around the difficult areas that we'll talk about. So, you know, the likes of abuse, suicide, self-harm, there's quite in-depth modules around that. And we really try and prepare you as much as we can to get into the counselling room. You'll also have an observation shift where you get to come into the counselling room and see what happens. So you'll get to sit and observe a counsellor for a full shift. And that happens quite early on in the training. And again, that really gives you an insight into, is this something that I think I'll be able to do? And then once you've got to week 10 of your training, we offer 2 mentored shifts. So you would then come into the counselling room and you would take the contacts, but you'll have a mentor with you the whole time to offer you some support. And once that's all completed, if you're successful, you then come through to become a counsellor. So it's quite a long process. It's not a case of you come for an interview and you're in the counselling room the next week. You kind of have to think of this in a kind of I would say a 4-month forward plan. So if you were to apply to this week, we would then invite you to an information evening where you would hear a bit more about Childline, probably quite a lot of what I've just spoken about. And then you would come forward for an interview, and that would be with some of the staff at the Glasgow base, maybe myself and Martin, and it would be either in base or online like this, and we would have a chat with you about, you know, your motivation for coming to Childline, what experience you've got. It's quite an informal interview in terms of, you know, we're looking for you to be human, we're looking for you to be yourself, but we also need to hear the right things about what you can bring to the service and why you're wanting to be a volunteer. And because it needs to be the right fit, and it's not for everybody, and that's fine. But we need to try and get to the reasoning behind your motivation. And then, like I say, you would then be invited to sign up for a training cohort that would last 12 weeks. So it's quite a long process. I think sometimes in terms of your own where you're at in terms of your education, I think I came into some of the psychology lectures at UWS last year, and it was the honours year that I came into, and headspace was just not there. You know, the thought of starting to train to do something like this in the middle of a dissertation, just, you could see it was overwhelming. So think about your timing as well, because what we do ask is that once you have completed your training, we do ask that you give us 140 counselling hours back, and that works out about 40 weeks of the year. So we recognise things come up, you've got holidays, you have exams at university, life happens, so we do allow for that. But when we're investing so much in your training, and we have to plan our service as well, we do ask that you commit to that year. Once you've completed that first year, you will be given an SQA qualification, and that's an accredited qualification, which has been combined with the counselling hours and the training. So you need to have the 2 of them before you'll be able to get that qualification. So I suppose in terms of all of that, which is quite a lot of information, for you guys as students, I really think, you know, Childline it's so good to have on your CV, and it's not just because it's a good thing to do. The skills that you will get that are transferable across so many different career moves, you know, they really will stand you in good stead. And I think even just from a personal perspective as well, you start to think about how you interact with individuals quite differently. You start recognizing where you're maybe saying things that you think are supportive, but are maybe not supportive, or you could phrase things differently. And all of these skills, you know, when you're going for interviews, when you're networking with people, when you're, you know, in environments where, you know, people are maybe challenging you, pushing some buttons, you're learning skills and how to manage all of this, because that's all the stuff that happens in that counselling room. You don't know what's going to come through on a contact from a young person, but you have to be ready for that. And just having the ability to be prepared for the unknown is something I think that in a workplace, you know, is invaluable. In terms of your communication, you know, both online, offline, all of these things are really going to set you apart. If you imagine that there's 5 candidates going for a position, say as an assistant psychologist, for example, and you're all sitting with a really good mark in your degree, what is it that's going to make you stand out? Yes, having experience working with children and young people, but what is it you've taken from that experience? What are the skills that you've got from that experience? What training have you had? Have you got any extra qualifications? All of these boxes that you're wanting to tick, quite a lot of them you're going to get from spending a year with us at Childline. And I suppose a bit like me, but definitely Martin, from being there 18 years, people don't leave because it's a really nice place to be. We've got volunteers that have been with us for over 20 years. And, you know, I suppose I can't speak on their behalf, but you do hear time and time again that what they get from being with us is that sense of purpose. And it's really nice at the end of the day, walking away knowing that if you've just helped one young person to feel a bit better, then you've done something right in that day. So yeah, there's a lot of positives in it for you. Obviously, it's going to be great for us because we need volunteers, but it's a two-way thing, and we want to help develop your skills as well as offer the service to the children and young people.
Great. Yeah, so it's really, really interesting and important. You know, I want to volunteer now. I feel like I want to, you know, train, thinking, oh, okay. Even for students, like summer holidays, do you do like training during the summer, for example?
The training runs all year round. It runs on a rotational basis. So there's generally cohorts starting every couple of weeks.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you. So, I don't know if you finished what you were going to say. I'm just thinking about Martin. So 18 years.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really a dedication, isn't it? Yeah. So would you like to share with us about your experience and what made you, you know, a volunteer in the first place, and why do you do it?
I'm probably one of the rare breed at the moment in Childline where I never worked as a volunteer. My background has always been children and families, particularly in Ireland. I took a short break and I joined the library service, but again, ended up working with children within the library service. Childline has always been around. I mean, since it was set up by Dame Esther all those years ago, as it was meant to be just a one-off phone-in service, and the demand was so big that it turned into what Childline is today, Childline and SPCC. It's funny because when I started my career, children wasn't my target audience, but it just seems to gravitate. I seem to gravitate towards wanting to work and support children and young people. My view has changed, and particularly since coming to Childline, and I use the word less. I use the word help less, and you will use, and Jennifer said quite rightly there, you change, your vocabulary change, your mind changes. And I don't help, I support and empower young people because ultimately they know their worlds better than we do. We're a very child-led service and very child-centered service, but we're also very much attuned, particularly people like myself and Jen and the supervisory team. We're very much geared towards what our guidance are and our guidelines and our policies. So while a young person may not want something to happen, if it's in their best interest, we sometimes have to act, and that would be around safety, child protection, high risk. So yeah, it's been a long journey for me in Childline, a very enjoyable one, and I always say it's a privilege to work for Childline and also with children and young people, because the older you get, I think, and excuse me if I'm just talking generally, we tend to think we know what's best sometimes, and young people tend to get lost. And that's the privilege of working at Childline, is empowering and enabling young people to get the best that they need. Particularly at night time for us, as Jennifer said there, we can sometimes be the only base that's on, and we're covering the 4 nations. So it can be quite hectic. Last night when we were on shift, it was just constant, and it's constant high risk mental health, again, as Jen said, it's mental health, I would say it's 60% of what we deal with at nighttime. But we're not mental health trained. Some of us have a specialty in mental health, but when we work with Childline and we work with the Childline model, we're not professionals. What we are people who care, people who listen, people who want to empower, people who are empathetic, but also people who recognize children for who they are. So they are the Lindsays and the Danielles of the world. And that's what young people lose when they go into the care system and into any kind of system. So that what we do is we give them back their identity and we work with them as that young person. Mental health is, and we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg now in terms of COVID, social isolation, social anxiety is huge at the moment, which doesn't just impact on young people, but it impacts on their ability to access resources such as CAMs, such as mental health workers, because they don't have those social skills anymore from COVID. Danielle, you spoke as well about you would like to keep your camera on because for so long we didn't see people and, you know, we were quite isolated. I mean, we did work with children and young people who have, up until quite recently, never been to school, never had that whole social interaction. And if you have somebody who's already anxious and then place all this pressure on them. So they're the kind of calls that we deal with. A lot of high risk, a lot of suicidal ideation, a lot of self-harm. We never judge, and that's what young people tell us that they quite like the most about us, is that we don't judge. We would never judge if you self-harm as a way of coping. We would never judge. We would never condone it, but what we wouldn't say is, please don't do that. We would work with that young person to explore alternatives, and there are various methods that we can use. It's rubbing an ice cube on your hand where you would normally cut gives you that kind of same sensation. Anyone who's done exams or anything and you're getting stressed and you use the elastic band when your mind starts to wander. I did psychology over here and I did social sciences. And sometimes the two of them were wandering in and my hand was full of elastic bands. It didn't do me much good, by the way, but anyway. So we work with children, but we give advice, but we only give what young people ask us for. So we're not directive as well. We support young people. Our biggest tool is we listen. And again, Jen has mentioned that we are a listening service. We will direct young people if the expertise they're looking for falls out with what Childline can offer. And mostly we will signpost. Last night, without breaching confidentiality, we had a young person who was 18 and struggling to make an appointment with the GP. And there is a website that you may be aware of called Doc Ready. And that explains the whole applying for an appointment, some of the questions the receptionist might ask you, why they're asking you. So we have tools and resources like that we can use. Family relationships, I think, Jen, would you agree, is the next biggest? And that covers quite a multitude. It covers like your family relationships. It covers sibling relationships. It kind of covers, you know, some people will come on and they'd say, I'm having a really bad day in school. But the school may be the issue at the moment, but it could be that the behavior at school is coming from something that's happening at home. So we do that. We do a lot of exploring the young child's world, the child or young child's world, and that's to give us a better understanding of where they're coming from. So again, the model that Jen talked about gives us those tools to look at what's going around for that young person. It gives us a chance to explore their resilience. We kind of assess age and stage. It lets us see, is that young person capable of accessing support for themselves? It also allows us when we're exploring, because sometimes we think of capacity as do they have mental capacity, but we also check, Do they have a physical capacity to get to an appointment? Do they have a physical capacity to remove themselves? So it's kind of small things like that all put together. And I think it was yourself, Jen, the other day said about a jigsaw. It's about us collecting all the pieces, and with the support of that young person, putting all those pieces together so we get a clear picture. And sometimes by us getting a clear picture and reflecting, that young person is seeing their world really clearly for the first time. And that could be what is happening to them, but also the resilience they have. So, you know, this happened before and you managed to take yourself away safely. This happened to you, you know, and you've managed to find us and you've worked with us. So again, sometimes we're the first people that these young people speak to. And sometimes we're the first people that will say to them exactly what's going on. And I always think about, we're probably the first time that a young person has said something out loud. And part of the training is us not reacting. And sometimes as adults, we do react. Just as humans, we do react to something that's quite difficult to hear. Again, going back to what Jen said, and the training and the work we do, we're not saying be robots. We're not saying it won't impact on you. But while you're with that child, it's not about us and it's not about Danielle. And I'm avoiding saying your name. Ugana, is it? Because I'm afraid I'll pronounce it wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, Ona.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
So, you know, it's not about us. It's about that young person, and that can be quite difficult. And that's why the training is so important, because it doesn't mean we're not important. But at that point, for you to be able to be empathetic with that child, you need to be with that child.
Absolutely.
And, you
That
know,
sounds, yeah, that's really, really good. And Lindsay, my colleague Lindsay is here. Hi, Lindsay. Also, careers advisors, we are trained to, you know, listen actively and having impact, being non-judgmental and, you know, empathic, and all the different similar values and skills that we are taught as well. So I'm also curious to find out, so how do you refer to young people as clients or as young people, or what's the language? I think it's quite interesting to find out as well. And
I
also,
use children and young person, or children and young people. Clients for me, it just doesn't sit. Same as service user doesn't sit right with me. These are children and young people, you know, and I suppose in a world that now has so many genders, gendered fluid sexualities, children and young people, and or young adults, depending on who you're talking to.
that's great, thank you. So we covered what you do and how, you know, you train new volunteers. So we are curious to find out, so how do you apply and what do you look for in candidates who would be successful? Who would be your ideal candidates to train?
Anybody can apply, and sometimes that might smack of desperation, and that's not the reason that we're very open, because everybody has something. I remember we used to do interviewing, and I used to do the training before it went centrally. And I remember a lady came along one day, and this woman had raised, I think she'd raised 3 children. They'd all gone off to university. She was supporting with her grandchildren, and throughout her whole interview never mentioned her children. Never mentioned her children. And it was towards the end of the interview, and I said to her, is there anything else you want, you know, you feel you could bring to the service? And she went, no. And I said, what about your children? What about your grandchildren? And she went, oh, and it was only when she thought about it, because within being a parent, she had been part of a parent support group within the school. She had been part of the Scouts or the Cubs. And people who have children tend to forget they already have some of these skills. So anybody, a genuine interest and a genuine care for children and young people's lives, that you're in the door for your interview if you can demonstrate that. Clear values, clear respect for children, clear respect for their world, clear respect for others. So anybody that has those genuine qualities And sometimes people don't think they have them. And I think that's unfortunately where we lose people. And if we can get them to the information day and then the interview, we generally think we have them then, because we're quite good at highlighting the positives. That sometimes it's like when somebody asks you, what do you do? And you always only give half of your role. And it's only when you go away and you think, oh, but I do that, or if you write it down. I'm the world's worst, I have to say. So that's a personal experience. But yeah, anyone who has those qualities, caring, empathetic, and has a genuine interest in supporting children and young people.
I think I would say as well that think about where you are in terms of your own life, are because you do need to have a level of resilience for yourself. So, you know, if absolutely we need people to listen. That's all we're really asking you to do. But you do need to look after yourself as well. So that ability to have some self-reflection is really important. And not to be afraid to ask for help. I think people sometimes come to us and think, oh, you know, I've got a bit of anxiety, or you know, maybe I'm really nervous about a certain situation, or you know, a lot of people have been touched by suicide and self-harm, and those fears around dealing with that can take over. But actually, all we're asking is that you're open and honest with us. So many people in the organization have been touched by various things. I think that's what brings us all to this kind of field. And all we ask is that you are open and honest with us so that we can give you support to get into that counselling room. If you're experiencing something, some kind of mental health challenge, you know, anything, any neurodiversity, any of these things, it doesn't mean that you're not a fit for Childline. It probably means that you're a good fit for Childline, but we just need to know about it so that we can offer you the support. So I would encourage anyone that is going to apply to be open and honest with us. It doesn't mean that it's a no. It probably means that, you know, we're more likely to think, right, well, this person's been through something, they have some sort of insight, but we need to see that you've got that self-reflection and resilience as well. Lindsay, did you have your hand up there?
Yeah, sorry. Hi, I'm Una's colleague. I think it was interesting hearing about how you support your supervisors on shift, are there to support the volunteers and the staff, because I think if someone had said, "Oh, go and do work with Childline," I'd be like, "Well, what about the impact it's going to have on me?" Because you are dealing with obviously a whole range of very serious themes, and it could be quite overwhelming. So I think you've mentioned that a few times. I think that's quite nice to highlight that about the support, because I think we do need it.
Yeah.
Maybe not to the extent in our jobs, but certainly it is nice to check in with your colleagues just to see how you're doing, and is there anything you want to talk about, because sometimes we can take things home that we shouldn't be.
As
thanks
Jen
for the
mentioned,
highlighting.
yeah, as Jen mentioned earlier on, Lindsay, when the volunteers are on shift, there are generally 2 supervisors, and when it comes to the high risk calls, although you guys would be still, and I'm talking about you guys as if you're already going to be volunteers, but it would be very much, you would be on the call, but for the very high risk calls, that's our responsibility. So we would direct you, we would guide you, we would give you questions that we need you to ask, but ultimately that's our decision. And it's not that we don't trust you, but we may have additional information about that young person that you know wouldn't necessarily be out there. But also that's our role. Our role is safeguarders. And I always think we're the safeguarders and you're like the information collectors and the supporters. And you know, we can't do our jobs without the likes of our volunteers, because they do the graft, and then we come in, we support you, we support the young person, and that keeps it going. Because ultimately, if you're not getting supported, you'll get burnt out, and we lose your time, and then we lose a resource and very valuable support for children and young people. So yeah, supporting our volunteers is a huge part of what we do as part of our role.
Molly, you've asked, can you specify if you'd like to do chats or calls? What happens is you're trained for both. And then in the counselling room, you would, on our system, you put yourself ready, and it's whatever comes through. You would be ready for a voice or call. Voice calls, generally, I think the way the system is set up, take priority. But I think I think it's something like 75% of the contacts coming from young people are on the online chats. But they take much longer. So if you an online chat with a young person can take 50 minutes up to an hour, and actually on a voice call you get through so much more. But the training trains you for both. The skills are very similar. There's just some nuances that you look out for. Obviously, you know, tone of voice you can't hear on a chat. But you would be trained to do both.
And if talking on the phone, Lindsay mentioned earlier on as well, not Lindsay, Jen mentioned earlier on, we do have an email service, and that's done remotely from the base, and it's a different team. But you know, if you do have some concerns about actually taking voice calls, but you want to volunteer, again, come along and talk to us, because there's always a solution, you know, because we do value people want to give their time up, and we very much appreciate that.
I should also say as well at this point that we've also got deaf volunteers, so and visually impaired volunteers. So, you know, we are very inclusive. If anyone has any sort of disability, we will do our best to support that. We've got special computing systems for those that are visually impaired. We've got interpreters that come in through the training and on shift, the shift support for deaf volunteers. So, you know, it really is open to everybody. It's not a one size fits all, and we will support as much as we can.
That's great.
And I think in terms of applying, if you go on to all you actually really need to do is Google volunteer for Childline, and it brings up that first page. It's on the NSPCC website. It gives you a bit of information about volunteering, and then you select where in the country it is you'd be looking to volunteer. And then it's just a signing up process from there.
And I wonder, do you do PVG checks?
Yeah, we do. If you're successful at interview, we do I think it's an enhanced.
Yeah, we do an enhanced disclosure.
And that gets you can't go into the counselling room after your training until we've got that back.
Yeah.
And also, if you're already a member of the PVG scheme, you know, you add that on, and there's a separate form. So if you could tell us all that when you apply, it just helps, sometimes speeds it up, because where we find a delay can sometimes be is getting back to PVGs and the disclosures. No, our organisation, Molly, pays for all disclosures. We look after it.
And we also pay travel expenses as well. So if you were traveling a distance, you can claim back your traveling expenses, if that's petrol in your car or train, bus. You know, we don't want you to be out of pocket for coming into base. There's also a very good snack table that's well managed by one of our supervisors. So there's always snacks.
Yeah. Just to say, and it is the only downside, there is a limit to what you can claim back for travel.
Yeah.
Danielle, did you have your hand up?
Yes. I guess most of comes through, as I say, a call or online chat or email. But also, do you receive referrals from anyone? So, or how that works? So it's only, let's say I was a young person and I was suffering from a distress moment, and I would call, that's the only point of contact.
We don't do what's traditionally known as a referral. You know, so it's really a service led and fed by young people. And they choose to contact us. It was never set up to be one of these continual services where young people contact us every day for an hour, but that's how the service has developed, and we do have young people we work with on a constant basis. Where when I say it's not a traditional referral service, Jennifer touched on it earlier on, we do have therapists, we have crisis teams, we have doctors, psychologists, CAMS workers who have us on a list of safe practice for children and young people. So we call them a safety plan. And young people go through this list at night time or any time during the day where they're not able to access their main support. and then they will come to us. What we've noticed over the last couple of years is we're moving up that list rapidly, and we're generally within the first 3 or 4 people to contact on that safety plan, particularly at night time. So while we don't get traditional referrals, young people are directed to us by their main source of support. The flip side of that is we do refer out to the likes of social services, local authorities, schools, any kind of support that young people need at night time. And Jen, having worked with us before, is very much, we do a lot of work with the police, the ambulance services, and that's just basically because of the level of high risk that comes into the room at night time. But we will also offer a referral the next day with consent, and that's where the young person has given us permission. And we will contact schools or social services, CAMS workers. So I hope, does that kind of explain, Danielle, how it works?
Yeah, yes. And also I guess my concern or my interest in is finding out, for example, the young person in the moment of risk, they call you, and then after that, what goes from there? If they keep back or they don't keep back. So things like that, as you answer. So you refer that to more the closest they can check.
Yeah.
But I guess they can come back anytime.
They can, and I think I mentioned that but at the beginning of my section, is we work with young children and young people and young children to empower them. And our greatest outcome would be where a young person feels empowered to seek that support themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's we kind of work with them to look at their resilience. We don't say, oh, just go and speak to. We can sometimes spend weeks practicing, rehearsing, role playing what they're going to say, mimicking what we're going to say. We look at when is going to be the best time to speak to them. How are you going to speak to them? How physically capable are you of getting to here? So it's very much, we're still involved, and our best outcome is when that young person is able to do that for themselves. The next step is when a young person gives us permission. So they would say, yeah, I want you to contact my GP. And that could be social anxiety. It could be because the young person feels that they're not being heard. The young person might feel that, particularly if it's a family GP or a family doctor, there's concerns around confidentiality.
Mm-hmm.
So all that's taken into consideration. And then the last one for us, and it's the one that we try not to do, but at nighttime, it's kind of, I hate to say, it's like bread and butter. It's that we would be breaching that young person's confidentiality because of how they presented. We would work with them to try and get permission. But if they kind of just refuse, we have a system in place that we can pass all that on to the relevant services.
Yeah, but it's duty of care, no? So we can't.
Yeah. I suppose it's maybe worth highlighting, and it links into Molly's got another question. So we've got quite a unique confidentiality policy for children and young people. We hold a lot more risk than schools, CAMS. A young person can tell us that they're self-harming or they've got suicidal thoughts. We will hold that. We will only breach to somebody else if we think that young person's life's in danger or someone else's life is in danger. And the reason for that is we want to be that safe place for the young person to talk. And like Martin's saying, empower them to be able to seek further support. So, Daniela, I saw your face there and that almost shock of us holding that risk. We will obviously safeguard and make sure that if somebody's self-harming, for example, that they know how to look after their wounds and know how to seek support if they need it. And that goes back to that mention of capacity. If we feel that young person can keep themselves safe and that they are not going to come to any immediate life-threatening harm, we'll encourage them to keep working with us and we won't tell anybody. That can be quite difficult for people to get their head around initially. But what I will say is that the training really helps with that and goes into a lot of detail around why, what the benefits are, how we cope with that as volunteers and staff. We get a lot of young people that come on and talk to us anonymously. And Molly, you've asked about is there any in-person work that we do or support groups? And we don't do any of that in-person work. And that's because it's a confidential service. So if a young person comes on and they want to call themselves X because they don't want us to know who they are, that's okay. We will work with that. We will obviously help them feel empowered to seek the in-person support. But for us, again, it goes back to what we are essentially as a listening service and a safe place for that young person to offload their feelings and have people reflect back with empathy what's going on. And we're not there to fix, we're there to empower. So yeah, but it all gets covered in this training that you will get. It will become a lot clearer. And if you've got any other questions, I'm conscious of time. Martin and I, or any of the other people in Glasgow, will be more than happy to speak to you. And what I would say is come along to the information nights, because that's where you'll get to meet other people. They'll have questions that maybe you haven't thought of, and you'll really get a good insight into what's what it's like being in Childline.
That's great. Thank you very much. Really good, comprehensive, answers as well. Because sometimes when we ask questions, we are thinking yes or no answers, but actually there are more, more complex answers depending on the situation or the individual, or even depending on what time of the day and how they are answered the questions as well. So thank you so much. Do you have any other questions? Are we okay? Yeah. Okay, then, so would you like to add anything else before we finish the session?
I don't think so, just that we would really love to have anybody come along. That you've got nothing to lose from coming to the information sessions. That's what I would say. You don't need to make a decision there and then, but come and hear more about it, ask questions, speak to the people that are there. The more information you've got, the better informed you are to make a decision about whether it's the right thing for you. But we would absolutely be delighted to have anyone show an interest in the service.
Thank you so much for your time, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Molly, as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to, thank you both for coming along today and sharing this amazing and very important work, impactful work you're doing. I'm sure you're saving hundreds and thousands of lives and empowering young people to, learn how to pick up themselves back and have the resilience to deal with difficulties in their lives. And as you say, it's not only for people's workplace, but it's also life skills, because it's in families, with children around, and how do you deal with different things, even listening to each other. I think it's very, very useful in personal development as well. So thanks again. And I'm going to be putting this recording on different platforms with the link to the application form for the volunteering. And if you have any questions, please do get in touch with Jennifer or Martin or myself. But otherwise, good luck with your application through the volunteering section. And good luck with your studying. And I think if you're listening to this on the platforms on Aula and Moodle, etc., please do go and apply for it. Go to the information day, days and get the training. Maybe summer holiday sounds like a good idea, so that you're committed, you have the time to go through this, and this is a very good employability skills you should grab. Okay, then, thank you everybody, and have a good afternoon. See you later.